That's okay. All right. Welcome aboard, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Anton Chaitkin is my guest. He is the author of Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress, From Franklin to Kennedy. This is volume 2 of his book, 1830s to 1890s. He's also the author of Treason in America, which I read many years ago. Anton, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Charles. It's wonderful to be with you, and it's a very auspicious time. A lot of real crisis in what we're going to do as a nation.
Indeed. And I want to see if we can define that a bit and to perhaps take a look at some of the philosophical aspects of the Trump administration and what President Trump calls the golden years of America. And it's my general understanding that much of what he seems to be advocating is in line, I think, with your particular philosophy, in that you seem to promote what has been called the American system, going back to Alexander Hamilton and Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams and several presidents before the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, you might say other presidents have embraced elements of it. And I mean, it looks to me like Trump. Well, we can talk about what that is, but am I on board with saying that President Trump is a move in the direction of the American system, as you describe it?
In some respects, that's true. I think let's start with the fact that his campaign for the presidency caused a panic among the transatlantic establishment, the elite, that has governed the country, especially since the death of Kennedy. He said, we're going to have normal relations with Russia, and we're going to banish the idea, the spell of free trade and the deindustrialization of the country that went with the free trade regime.
Right.
He also did some other things in the direction with other aspects of that same filthy transformation they pulled on our country, going against radical environmentalism and certain aspects of the woke problem. But this starts getting into the culture wars, which are largely not useful. But what has to be understood on the free trade and the idea of rebuilding the United States, we have to carry out some very large scale construction in the United States, and it has to be done in cooperation with other countries at the same time as we're protecting our own workers, our own manufacturing. If you look at the people that actually industrialized our country in the first phase with Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams before the Civil War, and second phase during and after the Civil War, especially the 1870s, the people who did this, Abraham Lincoln, his political partner and economist Henry Carey, and the people around the Pennsylvania Railroad, these are the people that built the steel industry from scratch. They sponsored the Edison and the electrical industry. They built most of the railroads. This was all done with federal initiatives, and that involves the direction of credit from the federal vantage point. It involves modernization by having new industries. Today, that would be high-speed rail. It would be a major federal initiative on the space program. It would be nuclear fission and fusion. But these kind of things were done with a spirit of universal progress. Very important. That is, we aided other countries to defy the imperial system of the time. We rose as a nation with high tariffs and with our mission of improvement of our own people. And we were aiding other countries, Germany, Russia, Japan. We tried to do it with China to defy the British imperial system that had rules against countries advancing like that. Ever since Lord Shelburne in the 1780s, when they imposed this idea of free trade and that no other country would be allowed to follow England's footsteps in getting an industrial revolution. So this was a real showdown that was going on at various times between the American Republic, led by the nationalists, led by the economic nationalists, and the imperial faction, which included some financiers and included the slave owners in our country, but it was London centered. So those are the two sides throughout our history. And so Trump, just to finish up here, Trump, to be successful, he would have to level with the American people as far as he understands it, to say, what is the problem? What is the establishment? How have we changed as a country since the death of Kennedy? How has our mission changed from this kind of progress? What are China and Russia doing and other countries? What are they trying to do? We could participate with them and build our country as the leader of the whole process. And this is very different from what is being discussed now. You have to get the history of this, or you're really not going to make it.
Well, it seems like what we're talking about here, the American system, which was more formally recognized during the time of Henry Clay, who actually wrote a book called The American System, really started with America's revolution against the British occupation, the British colonial time, when they tried to impose this international order. They had mercantilism, which basically allowed manufacturing to only exist in England, and that we would ship raw materials, and it would keep us in a sort of a quasi-plantation condition. And that the founding fathers on all sides rejected that, and they began a process of industrialization. They rejected the Bank of England control over our currency. They wanted to have their own national, what they call the continental script, which the British tried to destroy through counterfeiting, but didn't. And that they wanted sovereignty and independence.
That's right.
Yeah, and that the national system was very well expressed by first by Hamilton and Washington, and then later by the American system, in that we were building domestic infrastructure in the form back then of canals, ports, and other means, and highways, interstate, as a means of connecting the country and creating a sense of national cohesion, and also tariffs, as opposed to direct taxation, which basically was a tax on imports as opposed to a tax on American income. And President Trump has done a brilliant job, I think, of sticking to this plan. He has actually said, for example, with tariffs, that he hopes to not replace, but reduce the role of the IRS to be replaced by an external revenue service, and that there would actually be financial incentives and rebates to Americans who are creating and who are producing and generating and accumulating income in the form of tax reductions. He's also talked about infrastructure. I don't know if yet he's really gone with any major infrastructure projects, but that seems to be his orientation as a builder and as an not industrialist, but as a real estate mogul. And he's taking on this internationalist world order mentality that's basically grifting off the rest of us, that basically makes money from debt, and that makes money from deficit spending, and then selling us back our money at interest. And he's instead going toward a production economy. He's rejecting Wall Street and is replacing it with Main Street, as I heard Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent actually state in an interview recently. And I think that we need to make sure that this concept is articulated clearly, so that the American people can understand what we are going through, which is a major I don't want to use the word revolution. In a way, it's a counter revolution in not only in our economy, but also in our politics and in our culture.
So let's look at a couple of problems and a couple of things that need to have a much deeper understanding, deeper dialogue in the national conversation. First of all, you have the two parties. This is a nasty setup that we've unfortunately had ever since the beginning,
Right.
in different forms. So the Democrats, in this latest several decades, have been anti-industrial. This is radical environmentalism, various other forms of killing off the future. Republicans have been dominated by the Austrian school, which is a branch of imperialism, which says under the international imperial idea, no country should be allowed to interfere with the market. Now that contradicts the idea of tariff protection. In this case, what they're talking about is budget cuts, savage budget cuts, when what's required is to differentiate between government that is playing an essential role as the scientific center for the country, as a spur, as an organizer of projects, not to own it. It's not socialism. But for example, the space program and other initiatives, the certainly high-speed rail, all of that would have to be federal. And you have to see how this was done in the past. This is not a matter of spending yourself into oblivion. This is the opposite. When you invest in these kinds of infrastructure projects, and you're directing credit, when the federal government directs credit, then you have a blossoming of production in the country that cuts down inflation. That's the way you get out of the debt problem. The debt problem is not just the national debt; it's the whole deficit in our country, in our population, as well as in our whole national economic life. So, first of all, you have to get rid of this idea that you're going to solve the debt with budget cuts. This is a nasty import from the British and the Austrian, Habsburgs and so forth. The second thing is, what's the relation of wars to progress? Every president and every leader of our country that was an initiator of new industries and that promoted the tariff system, Henry Clay, Abraham Lincoln, later on Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Really, these are all people with the same point of view as nationalists. Roosevelt really had reciprocal tariffs and trade deals. It's really the same thing. It's the same idea. So they were for universal progress. They saw and criticized directly the imperial system that had war all the time. Remember that the imperial want to have so-called free trade and banning each nation from protecting its own new manufacturing so that they can't rise and become a power. But they also have wars, insurrections, color revolutions. This began with the British, Lord Shelburne and Bentham and others in England, sending anarchists into France to have to destroy the French Revolution and make it destroy France so they would not rise. This is a model for the color revolutions of the past, period since FDR, particularly since Kennedy. So what we would have to do, and I think Trump would like to have peace in the Middle East and in Ukraine, but we don't have peace in either place. We don't really have a ceasefire either way. We would have to really have a deep national discussion about who are the warmongers. Where does this come from? And I think we need new religious leadership as well. I think the religions have failed, and we need those religious sections of our world, different world religions, Christianity, Judaism, and the other religions. They have to succeed. We need to restore the idea of man in God's image. We don't have that now. We must have that. And that's the way to begin to talk about why the United States has to be a promoter of progress and not a killer of mankind with the sanctions, the wars, the color revolutions. That's all British imperialism. Why should we keep doing it? You know, we should concentrate on building up American power and reaching out with a hand of friendship to the other great nations. Every country in this world has the same interests, every nation and every people. Terrorists are created by war and instability. They're crazy people. Some of them are on drugs, like the ISIS people. But every nation, including China, including Russia, including Iran, even North Korea, every country has same basic needs to have industrial progress, scientific progress, and American influence that would change whatever is wrong in any of these countries would be most powerful if we build up our country at the same time as we extend the hand of friendship. And we have to back away from nuclear war at the same time. We have to have confidence. I think that Russia and China would have more confidence and trust in the United States if they saw that we were committed to a massive industrialization and infrastructure building program in our own country. It would show that we were strong and going towards more strength instead of so weak that we would rely on nuclear weapons. In other words, that strength equals the possibility of cooperation.
Indeed, and in a way, it is if we are who we are, we would set an example for the rest of the world, which is, of course, the title of Anton Chaitkin's book, "Who We Are: America's Fight for Universal Progress." Anton, you've covered a bunch of areas here. As far as the area of the budget cuts, I think that there has to be budget cuts because a lot of this money is going into these international grifting.
In some areas, for sure.
For example, USAID, I mean, it was used as a slush fund to fund the internationalists, and a lot of that money filtered its way back into the pockets of corrupt left-wing politicians. The Department of Education could be gotten rid of. It's $320 billion a year, and it does nothing to actually educate a child. Maybe they could have a couple of minor things they do good. I mean, maybe it's worth maybe at most $1 billion that could be absorbed by other agencies. It's like these things are draining our treasury, and they're not productive. They're not creating anything either tangible or spiritual, for that matter, that benefits our American way of life. And so I think that those things have to be cut. The fraud has to be wrung out of the Social Security system, where we now find out that people over 110, billions of dollars going out to them. I mean, that's fraud. This used to be called good government. Now, of course, they're keying Elon Musk's car because he wants to do this. You know, the things like, unemployment benefits, all of this stuff is filled, and that has increased hugely in the last 4 years under Biden. Money to Ukraine, that's another scam. I mean, you talk about perpetual war for perpetual peace, which was the name of Harry Elmer Barnes's book, and it was a brilliant book. Of course, he'd be denounced later as an anti-Semite, which is not true. But he was a real pain for this internationalist Anglo-American establishment that we're talking about. But since Wilson and since World War I, the policy of this country has been to perpetuate international wars for international peace. And it's been a horrible human rights problem. It's destroyed the lives of tens of millions of people. It's cost huge treasure. And I think that Trump is the peace candidate. He wants to get out of these wars all over the world that we're doing nothing but exacerbating by involving ourselves in them. And
I,
as far as the spiritual piece, yeah, I mean, the whole rotten internationalist entity has usurped and taken out the spiritual component of all of our major religions. I think that is part of what Cecil Rhodes talked about in his Anglo-American establishment. I mean, it was actually Carol Quigley, the professor at Georgetown University, who blew the whistle on this. How the Rhodes Group, the Rhodes Roundtable, and all of those groups
yeah.
in the turn of the 20th century developed this internationalist order that isn't actually creating anything. It is imperial. I mean, the British are a part of it. The city of London is part of it. The city of Washington is a part of it. Maybe even the Vatican might be a part of it. But they've got their tentacles in all of the capitals of the world. They are not producing anything but war and division. And they have a deep state, as President Trump accurately calls it, that operates through secret societies, it operates through clandestine means to control the narrative, to
Well,
control the.
be careful about, you're an optimist with the American system, so you don't want people to be black pilled, which means they think everything is rigged against us and we can never do
Oh,
anything
no,
against
no, no.
it.
I am an
You
optimist.
don't agree with that. But
No,
can I go back to the budget?
sure.
I think it's important. Obviously, you have to differentiate between useful and useless or harmful elements of a national budget. So NASA and traffic control things and other essential functions. The agriculture department in its heyday revolutionized in a good way American farming and made us, that was part of our industrial progress. Uh, but take the Department of Education. I think that the discussion about this, if you start with a critique of the federal department, we're really missing the issue. I don't think the issue is really about what's woke or the imposition of nonsense from the federal level, although that is going on. I think the real issue is that the education in the United States today is near zero in terms of public schools and in colleges as well. I mean, forget the colleges for a moment, but what you have, the way to approach this is to say, how would we get back to or create a powerful and modern educational system that would bring up the literacy, the effectiveness, the thinking level, the skill level, and this including the spiritual level of our younger generation, and not lose them, but turn them into a workforce and a citizenry that can think, that can work, and that is independent. And I think that you have to put the two elements together. First of all, when you set up modern industries, high-speed trains, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, the space program, science centers, essential water projects to move water large scale and get fresh water where it's needed. That may be involved channeling water, and it may involve desalination. When
Right.
you do this kind of as a kind of overall outlook, that you're going to create a future where our energy use, our throughput of energy, our industrial power goes up by orders of magnitude. When you're doing that, then you also have to support the population at the same time. Part of that is education. Part of that is going to involve spending money. It's going to involve unemployment insurance. It's going to involve dealing with the drug problem. You're not going to do it the way we did in the past. You have to attack the offshore banking system to get at the people that launder the money for the cartels. We already know about that. The Senate has gone into that in depth, 2012. But put education into this kind of an initiative that we must have to really reindustrialize the country. It can't be done just with tariffs. You have to have this kind of vision, and it needs federal and presidential leadership. So education would be an essential component of that. The equivalent of apprenticeships, all kinds of entries for people that are already skilled as leaders, people that are becoming skilled as leaders and as gaining skills, people with no skills, people who are illiterate, and that's a very large number of people. I think it's not really counted right. A lot of what is counted as childhood mental problems are really a matter of not being connected to a productive society. And if you have a father and a mother and a family with several children, and they're able to make a high income, and they have a stable community, and there's employment in exciting modern jobs, for example, engineering that excites the kids to get into something good for their future. That kind of a family and that kind of community and nation gives you a chance to have a spiritual life that's different than a country that is disintegrating. A society is disintegrating industrially in terms of all these wars and so forth. So you have to put the education into this context. Do we need all these children? Do we need this younger generation? We have to set in motion the kind of progress where we are going to vitally depend on this generation to be the workforce and to be knowledgeable. That's how you get good education. You have to put it together with our mission. And I believe that we have to cooperate with the other countries to do it. And that includes people that we call our adversaries, like Russia and China.
Yes, I agree with that. Just to use education as a template by which we could look at a cross-section of issues in this country, I would suggest that a nationalized education system is not the way to go, only because our nationalized education system has been so thoroughly infiltrated by the internationalists, by the imperialists, going way back. It's not something that happened recently. It goes,
True.
I mean, my dear friend, the late Dr. Samuel L. Blumenfeld, wrote a whole shelf of books on this topic. He was a regular guest of mine. We did hundreds of hours of programming together. And he talks about how the importance of phonics as a way to actually learn how to read the English language, and how that has been replaced by what they call the change agents, with look-say methods which create dyslexia and create learning disorders and ultimately various social ills.
You had that in mathematics too, the new math. Same thing.
All of it. I mean, it's not just that. Even if you practically every subject now, I'm studying right now college level history and sociology, and it's been completely infiltrated by critical race theory and other Marxist programs that are destructive to people because it creates division, and it's based on false ideas. So because of that, I think that education in this country has to be local. It has to be under the control of local school boards who are elected by parents who have children in the school, who have a stake in it. And the school board members themselves should also be parents or had children who graduated from the public schools, and that they should have absolute ability to choose the curriculum. And if they have that, they're going to choose the curriculum that actually does the job of educating their children, and they're not going to be likely infiltrated by this international order. Now, if some of them want that, fine, they'll have it and they'll suffer. But it should be.
Go ahead. I mean, I think that this is where the problem of going into our past and seeing how we had progress in the past. And this is this book, right? This is happened in the 19th century. So if the local parents were to choose between their more conservative curriculum and the woke nonsense that's offered to them, they would have nothing to offer to the students. There's nothing there. The point is that you have to get back to a society that's has a mission of progress. The word progressive, of course, has been subverted like everything else, right?
Yeah.
We were talking. Lincoln was a progressive nationalist. People running the Pennsylvania Railroad, Thaddeus Stevens, other people who fought for the rights of Black people as well as building up the United States. So think about this issue of the races now in the United States. Supposing that you simply say, let's have, and I agree that education should be controlled by local school boards and so forth. That's what it was in the past. That's to me, that's almost a side issue. You have to have political, social, and philosophical initiatives on a national level that are aimed at getting a majority involved in what is for the interests of a great majority of the people. That includes really everybody, but you could have a huge majority behind candidacies. I mean, I'm talking about 80% population behind people that really had the kind of economic progress initiatives that we're talking about. So compare Martin Luther King's point of view to woke commentary on race. Don't do it from the standpoint simply of criticizing critical race theory. What was Martin Luther King's idea about economic progress? Well, I would say two things that are very striking. Number one, you have to raise the income, the job qualifications, and every other aspect, housing and everything else for the poorest people in the country. And number two, he said, our country has to be having constant industrial progress. The South has to be industrialized. He went over to Ghana and met with the president there, Kwame Nkrumah, the great African nationalist who was really emulating America's progress in much of what he did. And Martin Luther King pointed to the fact that they were going to industrialize and electrify their country with a dam that was built with Kennedy. Actually, it was built later with Kennedy's help to bring electricity for industrialization of West Africa. So Martin Luther King understood that you can't leave people in backwardness. And that this requires a national idea of progress with national leadership. At the same time, you have to protect people from racial discrimination and from oppression of various kinds. If you have police brutality, look to the federal government and see if local police departments are being militarized. What's that? Don't be pursuing things either on a woke direction or some other direction that are going to divide people on the basis of race. Look to those things that will unite the population for progress for the whole community, right? People in general, Black and white and other communities in the United States, the best people oppose the culture. They want to have beautiful culture. They want to have classical music. They want to have good things for their children. These are, and so if there is a national leadership that says we have to elevate the people of the United States. In many respects, we've become a failed society under this oppression of the Anglo-American, this transatlantic clique of globalists. We've failed in so many ways. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying of suicide and of drug overdoses. And so the country can be united around a serious movement for reindustrialization on a 21st century basis. It doesn't just mean opening up old factories, but you have to, this is going to be a tremendous fight. And people have to be able to look back. If you want to be a new Abraham Lincoln or a new FDR, the way to do it is to seriously inquire into how we made progress and united our people before and report that back to the people. It's different from either the Democrats or Republicans. It's better. America set the standard for world progress, and we helped other countries to do it directly. I don't just mean that. So
I mean, it's
we
the
brought
idea
electricity to the world.
to make America great again. It's the MAGA movement, which I think has become
That's what the
powerful
people
enough.
wanted who are
That's
in that.
right.
Yeah.
And it's become powerful enough that I think that the kind of what President Trump calls the fake media, which is, they've been so discredited and they're so controlled by this international apparatus that now they've been delegitimized. And because of media like what we're doing right now, it's sort of supplanted that, because anyone can do media now. And you have somebody like Tucker Carlson, who has a much bigger audience than the three major networks after he was fired from them, and others who are, Joe Rogan. I mean, these people have huge. Steve Bannon, another incredible podcaster, he has something like, I don't know, it's well over 100 million downloads. It's much bigger than the old, rotten, internationalist networks. And I think that is why this country is starting to win. The program that we're looking at right now with tariffs, which basically it puts the United States in a position of bargaining with foreign countries and having reciprocal tariffs, which work for both sides, as opposed to this exploitative system where our factories and our industries have been stripped away by foreign countries dumping products on the market and using slave labor. That we are now in a position, we're using whatever leverage we have left to try to level the field for America, with the hope that maybe we can recover some of our industrial base, which has been stripped away since NAFTA and GATT and some of these other agreements, which sold out our economic sovereignty. And so I just hope that we can get a grip on that and realize that the Trump people know exactly what they're doing. I think they've been planning this for a number of years. Now that they're back in power, they are doing exactly what they said they would do. And, it's going to be very difficult and bewildering for some people for a while, but it is, you have to take a little bit of a longer view and realize that it's going to work. Now, as far as the cultural elements are concerned, I think it's a great thing to see President Trump cutting funding to Harvard, for example.
But he's doing it for the wrong reasons. He's doing it for the wrong reasons.
Well,
I agree.
Harvard is teaching
Center of
racism.
treason in our history. But what's the problem with Harvard?
They have a curriculum that includes racism and anti-Semitism. I mean, I think that every president has the option, because they were elected to represent certain ideals, of where they're going to be spending our national funds. And, in the past, Harvard would get funds because they were promoting things like critical race theory, not to push that hobble horse, but, whatever, sex change operations for children or whatever they were doing. So they would get the money. But now with President Trump elected, he represents the people that elected him.
There's too much confusion about this. Let's look at Harvard. Look at Harvard. What would Harvard's role be? Let's start with this. What would that college's role be in a program for the rebirth of American industry and the raising of the wage levels and American cooperation with other countries in a positive way? What would their role be? they would be in a frenzy, and there would be turmoil tremendously, because they're one of the centers of globalism in the United States. That goes all the way back to the early 19th and even the 18th century, when they were on a lot of the people of the Boston Brahmins were on the Tory side, and then later the Tory Federalists and so forth. Okay, so Harvard has been a center of the anti-national or anti-nationalist philosophy in the country, and very closely tied to the British. Now, they have programs at Harvard, or the discussion from the Republican Party is that Harvard has programs that are these false programs to actually divide people on the basis of race, and claiming to take the side of blacks when they don't really.
Right.
And then they say they don't have a program to do that for Jewish people. That's a confusion. That's a total confusion. The problem is that the United States, Trump wants to, I believe, wants to end the war in the Middle East.
Indeed.
And so why are America, here's my take, and I think this reflects the way Franklin Roosevelt, John Kennedy, Lincoln, even going back to Washington, would have looked at the current problem in the Middle East. And that is that the nations of the Middle East, Arab nations, and Iran, which is not Arab, and some of the other countries around Israel, have a destiny in modern society to rise as powerful nations. They're very intelligent people, and they have suffered colonialism for a long time. The Jewish people came largely from Europe and represented a high level of culture and intelligence, but Israel was developed in the Cold War era, and it was set up on a basis of agreeing to condoning hostility between Israel and its neighbors. Now, I think that the way, and this has led to Israel feeling that it needs to defend itself by essentially murdering all the other people around it. And this is, whose fault is this? The problem has to be approached with how you would solve the problem. And I believe that you have to have the United States and other world powers, including Russia, including China, including some of the large countries in Europe, maybe Japan, India, many other countries perhaps, but the large powers have to get together and say that the war in the Middle East, the war in the Holy Land, is a threat to the world and has to be shut down. Now, I'll tell you, I'll report to you, I've done a lot of inquiry about this, that the American people who are confused about this whole thing, Jewish people, Christians, whatever, they have a knee-jerk reaction. They're saying that if you propose to literally shut the war down, which could be done by the great powers intervening, where you say we're going to absolutely prohibit any attacks from either side as we start to sort out how the two countries could go forward, say the Palestinians and the Israelis. You get a knee-jerk reaction from some people saying, if you want to shut the war down, then you're letting the terrorists, you're not going to get the hostages back. You're letting the terrorists win. To me, that's insane. What is revenge? First of all, start with revenge. Revenge is first-degree murder of your own children. First degree, because you know in advance that when you take revenge on other people, they're going to come back and kill your children. You know, you already know that. It's gone on for 75 years right there. This cycle has to be shut down. What will then happen in Israel? I think the people in Israel will decide that. But right now, the globalists in the United States and Britain have sent the bombs there to carry on this war. Maybe there was some funny business between Netanyahu and Hamas. I don't know, to try to prevent the other people, the other Palestinians from getting in there. But we've got to shut this war down. We can't have this war. We should have had Jerusalem as the great center of holiness for the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim religion and other religions. It's revered. What our monotheism and then great things that came from that are revered by people all over the world. So this has to be made into a zone of peace. Now, there have been proposals both from Franklin Roosevelt and from John Kennedy, very serious proposals, and from Kennedy, real in-depth proposals for desalination and other, and that was nuclear desalination, that he changed the whole International Energy Agency to do this. Right. Joint projects between Israel and the Arabs to get fresh water, to get industries built up on the basis of the new energy and the fresh water. That's the approach you have to take. You cannot allow this war to continue. You have to shut it down. And I think Trump wants to do that. But I would say it's a mistake to say the Trump people want to do such and such. Do you mean Trump and his immediate circle of friends? Do you mean all the people in the administration? There's neocons. There's globalists. There's people that have particular approaches which are not America's interests. And I think we share this interest with every other country on this planet. And so we have to have calm as well as progress. You have to be able to approach these issues calmly, without shouting, without attacks. That's why when I wrote 2 volumes so far of this book on America's the core strategic history, who we are, that's 1,000 pages. That's not between the 2 volumes. Many pages of pictures, so it's not all just hard stuff. But this is new material. We're going to need much more work like this to get into our history, to show how we were both powerful and humane at the same time. You can't have one without the other.
I'm just going to reflect just a little bit on the Israel-Arab conflict, in that I think that, like all conflicts, there's an internationalization of what should be a local conflict, and that has not augured well for anybody, for either side, because you've got internationalists and arms dealers, and everyone's making money on it, and there's an interest in keeping conflict going, and that sometimes it's best to kind of bring the fight more local to the actual people who suffer as a result of it. As far as the Israelis go, I think that the general consensus in Israel, and that includes all sides of the political spectrum, is that they have tried to have peace with the non-Jewish Palestinian Arabs, and that goes way back. It's not new. It goes to the time of the founding of the independence. It goes back to 1920, when the British started to agitate and create conflict between the two.
That's
when
right.
You had Herbert Samuel, who was...
I saw that in person, by the way.
Did you?
Yes. I was in Israel for about 1.5 years. That's where I learned Hebrew in an ulpan.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I didn't do too well in Hebrew school.
Okay.
But when I was about 20, 21, 22, I was there. Mm-hmm. And I went to this, I was on a kibbutz, and there, one of the old timers, the lady, told me that she had seen at the time of the Independence War, the British gave the keys to the local police station's arsenal to the kibbutzniks there, to the Jews,
Right.
and they gave the same keys to the Arabs.
Well, that's how Britain ruled their empire for centuries. They created a divide and conquer, and they would pit each side against the other, so they could rule the world from this little tiny island off the coast of Europe.
But I'd like to introduce an element that people have to think, I believe, really have to think about and search their souls.
Right.
That is, what's America's role here? There's within America. I want to bring up my father. Jacob Chaitkin was the legal counsel and strategist for the American Jewish Congress boycott against Nazi Germany in the early 1930s.
Okay.
And that was to try to bring down Hitler when he first started. And they knew that he was out to kill off or to destroy the Jews, as well as to go for a war. And that's the war part of it, especially was what the Anglo-American bankers wanted to do. My father, as part of the boycott, Jacob Chaitkin sued Wall Street companies that were promoting Hitler with debts. This was primarily people connected with Morgan and the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank.
Yeah, the I.G. Farben group, and I'm
thinking about American bankers.
Yeah, you're familiar with the work of Anthony Sutton, right?
I am.
Wall Street and Hitler.
I introduced some new elements into that when I took off from what my father was doing, and these companies were, for example, there were several industrial companies and shipping companies jointly owned by the Nazi government and Wall Street bankers, like the North German Lloyd Shipping Company. My father sued them to force them to pay debts to American bondholders and stop essentially funding Hitler. But Hitler had decreed that those companies shouldn't pay their debts on bonds to American bondholders. Money should go to the Nazi government. And these New York bankers were for that. This gang, this is the core of the globalists in the United States. And this is the gang that set up the situation of warfare and prevented anything from replacing. We didn't have a powerful program for peace in the Middle East coming from here. That's not going to be solved between Israel and its neighbors. They can't solve it by themselves. This is a world issue, and they can't simply look to themselves to solve this problem. For one thing, all the armaments are coming from the outside. And everyone, all these countries and people are proxies in one way or another. So we have to look at what is best in our background. That's not the Wall Street Morgan establishment. That's not the City of London. That's not the imperialists. That's the Americans, the American Republic. Remember, Lincoln was the founder of the Republican Party, and FDR's Democratic Party is different from, the Biden Democratic Party. So this is our background is as the world's developer and peacemaker, and that means that we initiate things like the creation of electricity, the space program, all these things. We were the ones who facilitated steel mills all over the world. And the protectionism to go with it. That's who America is. That's who we are. And we could, and we can, and we must, I believe, have a powerful change of policy to say that this war, 75 years long, must now be brought to an end. We cannot allow it to go any further. There are many reasons that can be given why it should go on for centuries more. All of them, I think, are really something that is fostered by these gangsters who rule over us.
No, I mean, I think that the sort of the Islamic gangs who are running the countries that are at war with Israel in combination with not only the international left, but also the international establishment. They're anti-Israel. They always have been anti-Israel for two reasons, I think. Firstly, because Israel is very nationalist and very capitalist in its orientation. It is very fiercely insistent on the nation state and the sovereignty of the importance of sovereignty. And secondly, because Israel's Jewish. And what I mean by that is that the Israeli people, regardless of their level of belief or observance, they believe in God. They don't believe in the state as
Some of
the
them do.
well, yeah, but I think that in a sense, even subconsciously, most of them do. And that there's this idea that there's some big greater purpose and greater cause of their existence than simply operating in the temporal world. And that the establishment despises that and they fear that, particularly the left.
I think that's true in a certain way that's very important. But I would like to focus back on Americans
Okay.
and look at what's happened to the United States since the Anglo-American establishment, these globalists,
Mm-hmm.
took down our industry. People think that there's been a movement away from going to church or synagogue. Whereas some of the people went into fundamentalism, fundamentalist Christians, maybe fundamentalist Jews, but I think that the issue is a little bit different. I don't think that you have simply a trend to atheism because people, learned about evolution or some other thing. I think that the religions of the world, every religion in the world, in this culture affected by this globalism, the religions have failed to focus and to refresh the focus on man's being a child of God. What is man? That's really the issue.
Right.
Do we have a divine destiny? Are we all made of one blood? Yes.
Yes.
There's the eighth Psalm of David is wonderful from that standpoint. We are given dominion over the world by God, and we're a little bit lower than the angels, and it says who we are. That's another sense that I have in my mind when I write about our past, our economic strategy and our national strategy, but it's also who we are as human beings in relationship to God. And so I think that this sense is very much connected to the mission of the society. If the mission of society is, consumerism based on imported goods, factories are closing, we have all the wars, we have violence, we have, what might be called materialism without good living standards. So you have the worst of both worlds. So, but the spiritual nature of the country is lost if we're not a productive and progressive society. If we don't have the mission that reflects this deep sense of what it means to be a human being as the child of God. And all people on this planet were created with that same difference from animals. It's funny. Lincoln had a profound sense of this difference between man and animals. Human beings work like animals work, ants or beavers, but we change our work with creativity, with invention. And so we rise. And
Right.
that is the essence, the spark of man's different from animals. Teddy Roosevelt had a different idea of the difference.
Mhm.
His idea was you go with a shotgun or a huge caliber rifle and you shoot really big animals if you can. And that shows that man is the master over the animals. And that's the difference between man and animals. That's the idea of a 3-year-old,
Yeah.
unfortunately heavily armed. So
And they say that he was almost had the mentality.
spirituality. What's that?
They say that he had the mentality of a child, and some of the people that knew him. And then look, Thomas Jefferson expressed it in the Declaration of Independence. We're endowed by our Creator, which is God.
That's right.
In other words, with rights. In other words, rights don't come from the divine right of the king or from the idol, as the Bible talked about. It comes from the great sovereign who gives a grant of sovereignty to us as images of God, and that every human being, every man, and the Bible does say men and women, were created in his image. I think that Jefferson drew from that when he put those words into the Declaration of Independence, and that has been the philosophy of our creed. I mean, ever since, it's a recognition of some basic truths, and that it is a break. That's what made the American Revolution so profound and such a worldwide event, because it was the first time that there was a break between this idea that rights are granted as privileges to a supine population by these enlightened rulers that were almost like children looking to a parent. Instead, we are sovereign, and we give the government a limited grant to protect those sovereign rights. So, but since we're reaching toward the end of the show, and it's been a really fascinating conversation, Anton. Hope to have you back. Love to have you on regularly. But I want to bring up a hot button issue before we wrap it up.
It's not too hot.
And that is the business of central banking and Federal Reserve in the case of the United States. I have many minds on the topic. It's a complicated topic. It seems to me to be one of those debates that runs through American history. The central banks do not seem to, in my opinion, have the interests of America at heart, although they have come through at different times in our history. I mean, Jefferson, who was against the bank, nevertheless went to the bank when he wanted to do the Louisiana Purchase because he needed credit raised quickly. And so he eventually recognized the importance of a central bank. But the problem with it is that it is a cartel of bankers and industrialists who are not necessarily American, who very well may be a part of this very Anglo-American establishment we're talking about. And I wonder if there isn't a more constitutional way
Yes, there is.
for us to either have a direct issuance of currency or some kind of a separate banking entity, but yet one that is under the auspices of our elected officials.
Well, the Bank of the United States, as you know, this first and second banks created by Hamilton and then recreated in the 1820s, 1816. The Bank of the United States was not a central bank in the sense that we have with the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. It was for national purposes, which is not the case with the central banks. They serve unfortunately, they serve the purposes of this globalist clique and of imperialism. And I think that one way to really understand this, rather than have a theory about central banking, that's fine, but look at, I'm studying now the career of a man named Montague Norman.
Oh, yeah, from the Bank of England.
He was the head of the pro-Hitler faction in England.
And he was insane.
He was completely insane, that's right.
Yep.
He promoted fascism all throughout his career. He was the governor of the Bank of England for 24 years. He was also, in a sense, the head of American central banking, except when FDR exercised power against him and had his own man at the Fed. But Montague Norman worked through Ben Strong in New York City and the Morgan Bank firm. And the fact is that Bank of England, with insane anti-human objectives, was the leader and the dictator of the world's set of central banks. There is no such thing as central banking in one country. National bank is different. And every country has the right to control their own currency and their own banking system. And the government has to have control over credit in the sense of gently directing credit to productive purposes. This is not a dictatorship. This is not socialism. We have to be able to defend our right to rise. And that means that the international cartel of central banks and of control over trade, we have the right to interfere with that. And so this is a deep issue. I have a chapter in this second volume, which just came out. Chapter 4 is Lincoln versus the money power, and it goes into the fight over the greenbacks. We have the right to issue our own money.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be inflationary if we have at the same time the program for the upshift of our whole country to the most modern industry in the world, new industries, bringing more energy and more power through the work of each person. So this is the way that you actually defeat inflation, and it's also how you get, as you industrialize in that way, you make the citizenry more independent. A skilled person will not put up with so-called authorities. You know, you mentioned the divine right of kings. What about these unelected authorities that are all over the place in our modern so-called system of government? That's not our system. Our Constitution is our system. These authorities should not have any power. We should not bow to them. Some people who think of themselves as conservative, religionists say bow to the authorities. God put them in place. No, I believe that's almost like Satan saying, I have the right to rule the world. God put me in place. It's ridiculous. We
right. I mean, I think the Bible
our elected people are put there at the sufferance of the people. If they do right to help us rise as a people, then we will keep them in office.
Give them respect. But I mean, I think the Bible answers that in the story of Esther, when when Haman goes out on the horse, he tells Mordecai, "You have to bow." Mordecai says, I don't bow to anyone but God. I will not bow. And that's set in motion that whole story.
That's right. That's that's the American attitude. Indeed. Absolutely.
So, Anton, let my listeners and viewers know where they can get your excellent book and where they can. Do you have a website you'd like to share or anything else you'd like to share?
Well, you can buy the book, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 is from the 1750s to the 1850s. Volume 2 is 1830s to 1890s. They're both on Amazon. We'll soon have a Kindle edition of the second volume. We have it Kindle and paperback for the first volume. And I have a subscription website, Anton Chaitkin, .substack.com. I have Anton's Substack. You can look it up that way. I post things almost every Monday morning. So I need people's help to do this. We've got to be able to look in our past and become great again by what we did at our best, which was on behalf of mankind, really.
No, you're doing God's work. And Anton Chaitkin, I want to thank you very much for joining me today, as always. And I really appreciate it. And God willing, keep up the good work.
Thank you very much, Charles, for this opportunity.
All right. Take care.